All right, so today I'm talking with Laurent, and I just met him a few days ago. He left a comment on my channel and talking about his comic that he does and his Kickstarter. So I said, hey, this is exciting. This is something that other people that make comics might want to know about. So I invited him on the program, and here he is. So thank you, Laurent, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I really wanted to talk about both your artistic background, like making. Let's talk about that first, because I think the Kickstarter part is interesting too. But not everybody's going to be going that route. But I think everybody that works on something creative storytelling would be interested in your background there. So you're the writer on your comic. So what's your background as a writer? How long have you been writing, and how long have you been writing comics specifically?
So both started at the same time. Right now I'm 31. I started writing just in general back when I was 18, like fresh out of high school. A friend of mine messaged me randomly one day saying, "Hey, if you could have one superpower, what would it be?" And I was like, "Yeah, I really like the elemental stuff." I was like, "Wind, what's this about?" And he was writing just a story with us and our friends, with me and my friends, and I was like, "Oh, that sounds great. Let me help you with it." And for reasons that kind of fell apart after a bit, but like I fell in love with just the idea of storytelling. Um, so I started picking up more stuff on my own, and I ended up going, I was like, let me just write my own story. What's something that's interesting to me? Because anytime I wanted to write something, it's something I felt like I didn't see much of myself. So I wrote a comic. It was all just in one long Word document, and I thought it was a comic for myself, but it was called War. And years later, I did end up going back and making that a web comic. That was done in 2017. So from just writing just in general to producing webcomic to having a Kickstarter run from like for a physical comic, I've hit all facets so far, and I'm just progressing and learning and working towards that.
Cool. And the web comic, you did the art for yourself, or you had a collaborator
No,
at that point?
I I can do stick figures, fantastic, but that's the extent of my art talents. As far as art teams go, a lot of people have different ways of finding people. DeviantArt's one of the more popular ones. For me, I was on a Facebook group called Comic Book Colorists for Hire. On there, you can find a lot of people working for commission. Mostly, people do pencils and inks. Every now and then, I'd get like colorists, and very rarely would be letterers. But through there, I would just get like a wealth of people, like hundreds of comments coming in, because everyone there is looking for work. Some go to the extent of like I want to break into the comic industry. Others like, hey, this is something I'm good at. So I pick and choose between what I felt fit, the story I was gonna tell the most, and I'd hire them on as a team, and we'd stick with that. And my for that team at least, we separated because for me, money became a problem because making comics is not cheap. For anyone who is listening to this who's like, hey, I want to make a comic, just know it's going to be a long and arduous journey. It's rewarding when you get to the end of it, but it is definitely something that takes a lot of time and effort.
Yeah, we talked about this beforehand about I think the artist job is I mean the writer is important definitely, but the artist really puts in a lot of if you can do if you can do it all yourself, that's great. But I understand wanting to outsource it. I would love to outsource it too, but I understand like you pay people because they put in a lot of hours, and you get what you pay for. So nice. So tell me about this comic that you're doing the Kickstarter for right now.
So the story is called Sacrifice, and the elevator pitch I usually give for is Hellboy meets Evil Dead. There's a guy who, when he was an infant, his soul was tied to Lucifer. Now, whenever he dies, Lucifer will be summoned, and that'll bring about an age of demons and cause the end of the world. So, what he's doing right now, on top of dealing with like world-ending forces, is he knows that inevitably he's going to die, and that's going to happen. So he's simultaneously gathering allies who can help him, and on the day that he does die, that they can handle Lucifer. So it's kind of a two-pronged story on how that's followed out.
Yeah, it seems like I would say post 2000 horror comics have really come up in the world because of, I would say, Hellboy and Walking Dead seem like the big ones that, because they were adapted to movies, they kind of brought a lot of people back to comics, and then all these other things kind of branched off of that. So that's great because I just can remember in the 90s, like horror comics, they were few and far between. And for me, anything that diversifies the marketplace to more than just superheroes, and nothing, I'm not slighting superheroes. I'm just saying, like, I, I feel like, in the 1940s and 50s, comics there were all kinds of things, like genres, romance. There was like psychiatry comics, but so I like that diversity and anything that comes from that. So nice. What if like when you talked about the elevator pitch, what do you see as kind of what is it that's unique about this series that you see as different from other series?
A lot of it comes down into what I put into it. Um, Now, I mentioned Hellboy and Evil Dead because of those main characters for both those series are very different from what you see normal things. I'll start with Evil Dead, Ash Williams, a man in a horrific situation, nightmarish creatures, couldn't take it less seriously. Uh, Hellboy, you get a bit less of that. He's more serious than Ash, but there's still like world-ending things, and they still have plenty of room for humor. I really love whenever there's something going on. It's like this is a very serious scenario, but because of how the main character is built, they can't take it 100% seriously. I mean, that mixed with a lot of action stuff that I have. My artist is fantastic. He loves writing action scenes. I'm excited to show off a lot of them. I feel like those two things really help set apart from like we'll go with the John Constantine, who also deals with the supernatural, but it's he's just a very different as far as main character goes on how he would handle a lot of situations. And almost anything I write, I try to inject some level of humor into it. And without going into stuff that would like spoil the first or second issue, like there's an interesting moment with Bigfoot is all I'm going to say that happens in the first issue that I've had some test readers go through it and everyone has enjoyed that. So that's the main thing. You will get all this horror, and if anyone sees the Kickstarter video, like various demons, which is another thing I'm trying to focus on, is unique demons that you don't see. You won't be seeing like one generic type of demon across like horns and whatnot. You'll see very unique designs that both myself and my artist work very difficult or very hard on to make as like one of a kind as you can. And they'll be like throwaway demons. They only show up for a couple panels, but that's the level of extent that I want to show on what I have to kind of make it really stand out from anything else.
Cool. When you picked the artist, like how clear of a vision in your head did you have for what you wanted for, like, were you kind of flexible and you said, oh, this guy's art might work, or did you have like a definite idea and say, like, this is what I want, and if I can't find this, I'm gonna keep looking?
That's a two-parter. For him, I had picked him to do a pitch that I was sending to Image Comics. For reasons I didn't send that pitch in, but the main thing that sold me is like I loved his art. He hadn't really done demons before. He was open to the idea, but the thing that solidified it is it's one thing for someone to be like, I am an artist, I will do this job. It's another where I see that they're as passionate about their craft as I am with mine. Whereas like his dream is to break into comics, same as mine. I even on that 8-page submission pitch, I saw how much time, effort, and willingness to learn he had. I was like, that's something that matches me. So if I know I'm trying to break into the industry and I know he has that same drive, and that is the person I want to come up with. So while monsters is something that he's still learning how to draw, he's doing fantastic at it. I'd already seen enough art from that previously to know that this is the guy I want to work with.
And you found him through that Facebook group you mentioned?
Yes, every artist I've worked on with the exception of one, has been through that group.
And you haven't pitched to any publishers yet at this point, or you
Not
have?
for that comic. I pitched for my webcomic War, and there is a submission I was putting together, but I didn't. I mean, thankfully, it didn't get picked up for War. There's for anyone who does want to send something to publishers, is a very high chance you will not hear back from them. If you don't get discouraged. Keep writing, keep practicing, because writing is like a muscle. I look back at the stuff I did there. It's a web comic, and I've read through all of it again after someone mentioned it to me about it a couple weeks ago, and I was like, there is some good stuff here, but I can clearly see where I've grown. There's a lot of things as far as pacing that I could have changed done differently. way too much exposition. Like you'll always progress and learn if you keep staying at it. So back then, I mean, I was kind of pitching because that was my dream to be a writer, but I hadn't really taken the time to learn and grow versus where I feel like I am now, where I'm a lot more confident in my craft. And it's the goal right now.
Yeah, well, the pages I saw looked very professional. So I'm curious, why did you choose to go through Kickstarter rather than submissions first with this one?
So the main reason I did that is because I had made a couple pitches before for my first story. Now I believe that this one is much better, but at the end of the day, like publishers are great for getting your stuff spread out in a wider net. Well, what I cared most about is I wanted to make a complete story that people could have in hand, read, and enjoy. And I was like, okay, well, publishers can come anytime. I could hypothetically make 4 issues, 5 issues, and then go to a publisher and then they get picked up. But what I want is for people to be able to read and enjoy the story. And if I just make a couple pages and send to a publisher and they turn it down, then no one will get that. So I was like, okay, I've backed Kickstarter comics myself. I wanted to take the jump into that. I did all my research, talked to friends who had successful campaigns, and I was like, I'll try my best. Fingers crossed that it works. I know a lot of comics don't make it on Kickstarter, and fortunately for me, I overfunded my goal by over 1,000 or almost 1,000.
Right. Did you say this was your first Kickstarter?
This is my very first Kickstarter.
Okay, so let's start getting into that because I know a lot of people. Actually, I did a Kickstarter once and it was not successful at all. And like I wasn't totally. I was okay with that actually because like what we were talking about before, I was gonna my plan was to write and draw like a graphic novel and it was gonna be like a few hundred pages of work that I'm glad that I wasn't up for that. I realize now, but you guys seem like you are like ready for that. So let's go through that process of how you kind of got that ready and then made it a success. Yeah, where'd that go? How'd that start?
So it started with all the people around me. I was brand new to this. I had some friends who had some successful campaigns. I asked them for some advice. First thing I did was I made a pre-launch page after I had everything kind of set up, so I could try and get as many followers to hit the link to like notify me at launch. The more you can do to set yourself up in those first few days, the better. Because the big thing about Kickstarter and how it works is you will launch your campaign and you'll get a big boom in your first few days. Then it kind of trickles and like evens out a lot. I mean, you might have like a couple people every few days when you're towards like the middle of your campaign, and then the final boom will be in the last 48 hours because Kickstarter has a feature that lets you be notified or remind me when the campaign's almost done. A lot of it was just like my sister had done work for Facebook advertising. She taught me a lot about algorithms and how to set up proper business manager account. Uh, there's a wealth of knowledge online as far as, hey, what do a lot of successful campaigns have in common? Videos is a good thing. Rewards and how you price them, because there's a lot of rewards out there who are top heavy. I have someone I know who had put together Kickstarter and it wasn't working too well at the time. And we looked over his goals, and it was like, your value stuff that most people would normally buy, you've set it $75 to $100. Normally people would buy that same type of thing for like $20. And we had a conversation, he fixed it, like knowing how to appropriately price your stuff, not going in too far over your head. Like there's a lot of little things that you might not think about, but once you stack them all together, each thing can raise your chance of success. If you have an idea for a comic and you're like, this comic can be great, I love it, okay, don't put it up immediately. Take some weeks, maybe a month, just doing research to see every option, every avenue you can to raise your chance of success. Because I don't recall off the top, I think it's maybe 35%. I could be wrong on that, but it's less than half of the Kickstarter campaigns that go up are actually fully funded. So there's no reason for you to have a great idea and try to rush out to Kickstarter just because you think it's a great idea. Take the time you can, learn everything you can to raise your chance of success so that when you do actually launch it, you can have a successful campaign.
Yeah. Did you when you were promoting it, did you find that one method like Facebook, Twitter, email, like it was seemed like the most that you relied on most for spreading the word about it?
The one I relied on most was Facebook, because when you have a business ad account, you can run ad. You like it takes a lot of research to look through. Thankfully, I had my sister, but it'll let you look up specific demographics. So, hey, you have a certain ad group. Let's just say one of mine is called the image ad group. So people who liked image comics, but they had to be, there are certain keywords like had to like this, and this, so that it would only target people who would be interested in the type of stuff I have. Even there's even a group for Friday the 13th as far as one of my ad groups, because there is a horror element to my story. But another one of those keywords is they had to have comics also in their likes. So you do that, and you kind of have a ballpark of people who are interested in the type of stuff you are, and I would run the ad campaigns based off of that.
And that was, because I hear sometimes say like, oh, you need to let everybody like know about your campaign. But did you find that advertising was much more effective than word of mouth, like people that you know?
Word of mouth is definitely helpful. I had a lot of people I know back it. The problem there becomes I don't know how many people were from the, because Kickstarter will show you a breakdown of where your certain backers came. I had 159 backers for my campaign. Maybe 30 or 40 were people that I knew personally. So it's hard to tell specifically who saw it from like friends of a friends I didn't know, or people who were on the ad list and then checked it out. Like I had some comments said, but there's no 100% way to tell for sure who was what.
Nice.
So that's one of the tricky things. But yes, telling the people you know about it well in advance definitely helps.
Huh. And so now that you have it back, what is the timeline for releasing it?
So for this first campaign, it's going to be a bit wonky. I really like campaigns that let people feel really interactive with the process. So what I did is I had some tiers that let people put themselves in the comic, both themselves or themselves as an angel if they wanted to, themselves as a student if they wanted to, or to design a demon that would show up in one of the action scenes. And that's been cool. I've got some great feedback, and a lot of people are excited. Problem is, those pages can't be worked until I get all that information back. I knew people had busy schedules, so it's like, all right, I'll give people until about 2 weeks after the campaign. And now it's like this. It's like, okay, that kind of holds up my art team. Something I'm not going to do. It's this, but just as far as timelines go, right now it's looking like I'll have the physical copies by late, or digital copies by late August, and physical copies early September. And I've already planned out my second campaign. The script for it's done. The art will be started for it right when issue one art's done, and that will be launching somewhere early to mid October.
Nice. So your plan is to keep doing issue by issue new campaign with each one?
Yeah, so I'm gonna do the way I have me in step now versus what I did with the first issue is the issue will be done by the time the campaign is out, or at least mostly done. It'll be done before the campaign finishes, and then all I'm gonna be charging as far as the campaign goes, shipping, printing costs. Because at that point, I expect everything to be done, and I have gotten a lot of messages from a lot of people, mainly from outside of the U.S., where the main reason I didn't back at a higher tier was because I was only shipping in U.S. because it was my first campaign. I was, like I mentioned before, not trying to go too far over my head with this process for the first campaign.
You said there's a digital option for.
Yeah, so the cheapest option I had was digital for people who just kind of wanted the digital version of the comic. That will be based off of when the art team is done, it's lettered, and I can put it together myself.
And what's been more popular, the digital or the print version?
Print by a wide margin.
Oh, really? I would have
Um,
expected digital, but that's interesting. And
uh,
what printing, like, can you tell us about like the printing process? Because I'm sure a lot of people do want to, do a Kickstarter and maybe have print copies in digital. So how did you go about finding the printer? And can you talk about that?
that once again came from just talking to a friend of mine who I knew had multiple successful campaigns. He lives a few hours south of me. But a lot of that can be just done on research, like, hey, local comic printers or something along those regards. For me, it's a place called Comic Impressions, Florida. That's a few hours away from like where I stay. So I got in touch with them. They were very helpful, had a lot of great options. Like, look for stuff that you feel has a quality behind it. Like I just was curious about some stuff, and they sent me a full package with all the various types of paper that they use at each number of pound. Like, hey, here's 70 dull, here's 80 glossy, here's multiple actual full comic books with each of the paper types, so you can kind of feel it in your hand and see which one you would like the most. And I really like that level of like, hey, here are all our options. We want you to know you're getting. So I jumped on top of that. But looking at printing companies is a Google search away. I just happened to find the one through my friend that I fell in love with immediately.
But it seems like it makes more sense to look locally rather than to somehow like ship to you and then ship it out again. Like the shipping costs would just become, overwhelming.
I feel like that would depend from person to person. Like I lucked out with it being close to me, but even if I was far away, just because of how much I saw they're willing to show, I knew off the bat I was like, okay, this is the type of thing I like. This is going above and beyond. Because one thing to just send me papers with each of the pounds, it's a whole nother story to give me full comic books of each of the ones, so I can know how it feel for how a full comic feels in hand of this type of paper.
Interesting. Yeah, because I imagine there may even be. I mean, I really don't know anything about like printing on demand these days, but like there must be like an option where they print it and they ship it for you, right? Is that Have you heard about that?
I'm sure some places do. The one I'm going to, because I have a plan for how I'm going to ship out myself, because a lot of my rewards are very personalized to certain people. So that would kind of get lost in translation. And I don't want someone who like bought my comic and expecting something that I promised them to have an off experience with that just because I didn't handle it myself. There are reward fulfillment centers. Like I know Fulfill Right is one that I've heard of. There's definitely more. I just couldn't say who they are, but I couldn't say the cost. I don't have a problem doing it myself, but those definitely do exist. You just have to look into them.
Yeah, I noticed behind you, you have quite a few of those long boxes, or I don't know if they're long boxes, but yeah, boxes. Like,
Yeah.
so you got quite a few comics. What have been your comic like influences?
Oh man. As far as influences go, it almost everything. The way I usually read comics or experience any type of media is when I read it, I like to try and dissect stuff myself. Where it's like, okay, what do I feel like the artist or the author or even artist is trying to portray here? Um, if I was trying to tell a type of story, how would I portray it myself? I try and learn that way just by dissecting and just putting myself in the same type of situation. As far as stuff that had the biggest impact on me, uh, I would say it was Jeff Johns's run on Green Lantern, specifically Blackest Night, because that was the first actual. Like I read some trade paperbacks before. I never really went to comic stores regularly until Free Comic Book Day. I don't even remember what year it is off the top. I know the first comic, like individual comic book I ever had in hand, was a Blackest Night #0, and I read that. I really got interested. Went back and we read all the trades for Blackest Night, for the War of Light, and I read Blackest Night month by month, and immediately fell in love with that. That as well as a comic by Tony Bedard called Rebels,
I don't know
and
that.
I won't. I'm sorry.
Oh, I said I don't know that.
Oh, it was a run on during DC's. Actually, I don't think they had a specific storyline for it. It followed Brainiac 2 and a lot of just him dealing with a lot of stuff in outer space. And the Starro the Conqueror was the main villain of that. Because the Starro is a pretty typical DC villain, giant starfish in the sky. This one, they took a different take with an individual named Starro the Conqueror. And I won't really go into it. They do a lot of stuff that's subversion of expectations, which is what I really like a lot. Where it's like, okay, they set stuff up clearly, where it's like, all right, I know what the tropes are. I think I know where they're gonna go, and they completely go a different direction for it. And it's written in a way where you can never fully tell what's going to happen next. And a lot of what I write, I try and do that with, because what's the fun in a story if you can guess everything that's going to happen on the next page or in the next chapter or in the next issue?
Yeah. What about with conventions? Like, do you have any interest in if conventions start happening more of tabling at a convention, or do you think not really an efficient way to reach people right now.
Where I am, I'd say it definitely is because like this is my first Kickstarter I have, so people who backed it know about it. But then there's the people who actually go to conventions and do look for comics. Like I do plan to. There's comic conventions that are starting to open back up around me. And I definitely plan on visiting them more frequently when conventions open back up more in full. So I mean, it's definitely a great opportunity to meet and greet, and especially if you're in a situation like me, where after a few issues down the line, you have an interest in talking to a publisher. You
Right.
know, they see you there constantly, and you can meet and greet, try and build rapport with them. I'm not saying that's the way to do it. Don't like shove your book down their throats, but it's a great way to constantly put yourself out there.
Yeah, just having, once you have that finished product to be able to hand that to them, I think that helps a lot. That shows that you're serious, that you're professional, that you can see a product, a beginning, middle, and end for an issue. So I think that is very impressive. And yeah, man, I wish you luck as you go forward with your comics.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having. Thank you for coming on the show, Laurent.
Absolutely.